Kellen Lindstrom from Glendale, 4-star prospect, Glendale, Missouri, has committed to Tennessee. Now, a little bit of a discrepancy as far as how big of a commitment this is. 247 Sports has him as a 3-star. The 24/7 composite has him as a 4-star. The number 27 defensive lineman in the nation, number 228 overall prospect in the nation, and number 7 prospect in Missouri. So if you think to yourself that doesn't jive exactly, because 4-stars typically would be maybe a little bit higher than some of those numbers. Well, a lot of these guys haven't been completely rated, but they pick him up. He goes into the class of 2024. So let's dive into this one. And I'm going to tell you some things I heard about Tennessee football recruiting that I can't share all of it with you, but I'm going to share some things about the state of Tennessee football recruiting and where they are. Because at the end of the day, the rankings and all of that are very political. And I'm going to be the one person that's going to tell you why. A lot of people don't get into that. I'm kind of unique in this position because I covered recruiting so closely. And I don't care to tell you the truth because I don't run a recruiting website. But I will tell you this. Kellen Lindstrom, I think, is a very significant pickup. So according to 247 Sports, he did have offers from Alabama. He did have offers from Arkansas, did have offers from Auburn and California. I hate the term committable offers. Can't speak really if they're committable offers, but I don't think there's any question this is a high 3 to 4-star guy that Tennessee would take no matter how great recruiting is going. According to Alan Trieu, play speed and ability to disrupt play stands out immediately, has the frame to grow into a lot of directions, and could project to almost any spot along the defensive line. He ain't going to be a tackle, I don't think, at 6'5", 235 pounds. I think he's going to be an end that's going to be about 250 pounds. Talk to somebody about him over the weekend. Big pickup. Let's play my game. This is an anywhere, somewhere, or nowhere guy. That's our ranking. This is an anywhere guy, okay? So anywhere means that you could go to any school you wanted to. Somewhere means, there's only a few Power 5 schools that like you. And nowhere means head on down to Division II. I'm going to go ahead and dub this an anywhere guy with the Alabama offer in tow. What do you think, Caleb Calhoun, of Mr. Lindstrom?
Yeah, this is an anywhere guy. This is definitely an anywhere guy. I think that now whether or not he starts anywhere is a different story. I think the only thing that held him back, Dave, quite honestly, with his ranking, I think he would have been in the mid 4-star range. I think people are just a little nervous about his level of competition in high school, which, you know, that there is a lot of that's weighted a lot with a lot of these rankings. And I understand that we've talked about in the past, there have been massive busts that looked like 5 stars because they were playing against weak competition. A lot of times they were in-state Tennessee guys playing in a rural Tennessee county with no competition. And so I think there's a concern about that. But you're talking about a guy that ranges 235 to 245, perfect for an edge rusher on one side. Can definitely get to the passer. Seems like he's got at least enough physical ability to be able to stop the run and you're right, he's not going to play tackle, but he could probably get in between the gaps to stop the run if he needed to. And so I think the versatility, that's a big part of what Tim Banks does, particularly on the line, particularly because he runs so many different blitz packages. And I think because of that, this is a pretty good pickup. And it also, more importantly, because we talk about pipelines, I know Missouri is not a great recruiting state, but there's some talent that comes out of there every year. You know, a few guys that come out every year. And Josh Heupel is still showing he's got that pipeline into Missouri. And that's also why I don't think he's ever going to stop running up the score on Missouri when he plays them.
Oh, no, great point. I didn't think about that, but no, you're absolutely right. Okay, so I think he's a big pickup. Where does this take Tennessee? Because the reason I like 247, by the way, is you don't wait for recruiting updates. Theirs is all analytics based. So where does this get Tennessee in the recruiting rankings at this point in the season? Again, May 8th, this would mean nothing when I started covering recruiting in 2006, but it does mean something right now. The other thing that has changed in recruiting is I like the fact that a lot of these kids don't stick. You remember decommits were such a big thing back in the day. For some reason, they stick now, even early. I don't completely know why, but good, because coaches deserve that because they used to have
money, guys. That's why.
Oh, That's a good point. Okay, so that's why they stick. Paradigm shift in Dave's head just now. All right, so
Oh no, recruiting's on the up and up, guys. There's no shadiness at all in recruiting when players commit. They're not
right,
talking to endorsements at all.
right. Okay, so what do you got on Tennessee's ranking right now, which should be solid in the top 10, and where in the SEC, because suddenly South Carolina has become one to worry about a little bit.
Yes, this is still a concern. Tennessee is number 9 right now in team recruiting rankings on 247 Sports Composite. Now, Michigan and Ohio State are number 1 and 2. And guys, I've talked about this. We talked about the Big Ten TV deal that's coming in. We'll talk about another conference later in the show. There's a reason the Big Ten is starting to clean up on the recruiting show with the top schools, and it is something that the SEC is going to have to address. But Georgia's number 3, Notre Dame's number 4, LSU's number 5, Penn State's number 6, Florida State's number 7, South Carolina's number 8, and Tennessee's number 9. So you're looking at Georgia and LSU and South Carolina are ahead of Tennessee right now. Florida's just behind them at number 11. Guys, I want to say this up front. Don't get excited about Tennessee being ahead of Alabama. If you've covered recruiting, you know that the minute July comes, everybody asks what's going on with Alabama recruiting in May. Everybody always asks that question. And then by the time July comes, they've got the number 1 class. So there is no issue with Alabama recruiting right now. I can guarantee you that.
Agreed. Perfect lead in, Caleb. So here we go. So I was talking to somebody well-placed within the program last week. So I'm going to give you a little bit of insight, and you need to file this away, because the next evolution of Tennessee recruiting are these type of guys, being able to get a guy that Alabama wants, that Georgia wants. And I've said that before, but I'm going to bring some more information to the table right now. So based off the source I talked to, is there are a couple of guys. This is not the end of the world because of the transfer portal. There are a couple of guys that have been brought in that are a little bit incomplete. Okay, that are either not as physically gifted as some of the guys that you need, or maybe aren't as great as functional football players that you would like. I think Justin Williams-Thomas is a great example. Justin Williams-Thomas came to Tennessee. He looked like Eric Dickerson was on steroids. I mean, he looked absolutely unbelievable. Couldn't find a hole, was not a functional football player. Boom, you're out in January. So this would be like a major red flag if you're bringing in handfuls of guys that aren't ready to play by year 2 at the collegiate level. It's not as big of a deal now because you're just going to boost these guys out in January. They get paid. I don't rip coaches anymore, Tennessee or otherwise, for doing that because it's a business now. But what Tennessee needs to do more and more is win guys like these. Okay, they need to win functional football players. There's one player in particular. I'm not going to name the player, that has all kinds of physical ability, but he's not a functional football player yet. He didn't have a lot of tackles last year, but he's maybe one of the next best athletes on the team. Darnell Wright was the best athlete on the team. He was a functional football player. So they need more of those, I was told. Again, not a concern. I would be telling you right now, if this were 5 years ago before NIL and transfer portal, that, you backed yourself into a corner with some questionable players that need to be ready next year. Not 2023, but 2024. They're fine this year. But you're going to be able to jettison these guys out. The evolution is you keep going to boosters right now to say, hey, I need a Dante Thornton. I need a Keenan Pili. And I've been told by people not associated with Tennessee's program, it is clearly just a bidding war now. You go to Miami, you say, hey, Miami, what do you give me? They say $300,000. You go to Alabama, they say, we got you slotted at $400,000. I'm making up numbers. I don't know the numbers. And then you go to a Tennessee, and if Tennessee wins, then they get that guy. So that's all good. That's cool. But at some point, you're adding a lot to the budget, Caleb. I mean, the Tennessee's athletic department budget, I believe, is about $125 million. You don't want to add an extra $5-10 million in NIL money to that your boosters have to pay out, unless you're winning back-to-back championships, and then they'll be fine with it. So this is the type of guy that they need. That being said, there are some guys on campus that are going to get jettisoned. Okay, that's going to happen. Some guys that you probably even liked in recruiting. And I know I'm being a little bit unclear. I'm not sharing everything here, but there are winners too. There are guys that have showed up that are absolute winners that Tennessee has recruited. The two most prime examples are easy. Dylan Sampson, Squirrel White, right? I mean, those guys are going to have big time years. There's some other guys we talked about that I don't know if they'll play extensively at Tennessee, but that's fine since you have the transfer portal. But this type of guy, I really like. Alabama was in on him. I looked at his tape. I'm good on him. And I think Tennessee should celebrate this one. But that's kind of the state of Tennessee football recruiting. So they are not there yet. I'm going to be real honest with you. I don't get paid anything by UT. I don't have any sort of partnership with UT like some other media companies do. That's where Tennessee is. Okay. And this is the type of guy that would signal a bit of a change in direction and winning some of the Alabama and Georgia recruiting battles. Caleb, the ultimate is when Tennessee, and I don't want to harp on 98 like I'm some old man, but the other one, Caleb, that the real class, the thing that changed everything was the Georgia trio. It was Cozy Coleman, it was Deion Grant, and it was Jamal Lewis. When they beat those guys for Georgia, that changed everything. So either this guy or two or three guys down the road, probably not this guy from Missouri, to be real honest with you, but at some point soon, you're going to see a little flourish, I believe. And Tennessee's recruiting will be able to not necessarily rely on transfers as much, which is NIL cash, and they're going to be able to step up and battle those teams. That's the next step, okay? And I think they'll get there. They're not there yet, okay, based off the source I talked to, Caleb. So I wanted to share that with our audience because I believe you learn more on this show, as much on this show as anywhere else. So you and I talked about it over the weekend, so you probably got some thoughts, but that's kind of where we are and what we can share publicly. What do you think, Caleb?
Yeah, so it's funny when you brought this up. I've always criticized NFL teams for going on potential because they go on raw athletic potential more than I think you and I are both. If you were an NFL GM, your biggest thing would be plug in the tape, right? More than anything else, plug in the tape when you were drafting.
Mm-hmm. And that was part of our discussion too. That Tennessee is drafting guys on potential. Think Joe Milton, who I'm sorry to interrupt, who Heupel got. He can throw it 80 yards, but what if the receiver's at 64 yards? Think Ethan Davis, who I think is going to be a great player, incredibly athletic, but not a refined tight end at all. Okay, so go ahead, Caleb. Sorry.
Yeah, so I was going to ask, the reason I was bringing that up is with college recruiting to high school, is it the same or don't you have to rely a little more on potential because you can't really judge because it's so spread out and the competition and the levels of competition are so different from school to school, county to county, state to state that don't you have to rely even more on potential than plugging in the tape when you're recruiting high school talent?
Great point. You can't take Bobby Bocephus down the road at Powell High School. I say Powell because that's where I went. I got my PhD, Powell High diploma. You can't take Bobby just because he's 5'9" and ran for 2,500 yards and threw for 4,000 yards. You have to have some potential. I mean, there are a lot of productive guys. And the one that stands out the most that Tennessee debated on and lost out on was Randall Cobb at Alcoa. A lot of the Tennessee's coaches they weren't really split. They were all against him, except for Trooper Taylor at the time. And Troop wanted him, no question. They tried to get in on him. It was too late. Then Coop took to the job to Oklahoma State, and then you're not going to get him at that point. So that's a great example of they were split. They didn't think he had enough upside, even though he was very productive. It's a great example. I don't know if you got any more off the top of your head.
Oh, no. I mean, it's funny because you're right. And this is just to detail how hard this is. From the reverse, Chris Donald was a 5-star. Very productive. A very productive high school football player. There were concerns about the level of competition he faced, but Tennessee took the chance.
Remind everyone who Chris Donald is because you're like an encyclopedia. So remind everybody who Chris Donald is. I want to remind everybody to hit that like button. And if you haven't subscribed yet, you just got to do that. And we appreciate it. But the like button helps us bring more people in during the show. So even if you're watching one of the replay versions, we air live at 10 o'clock each and every weekday. So remind those who Chris Donald is.
Okay, so Chris Donald was a 5-star linebacker in the Eric Berry class. He helped push that class to number 2 in the country in 2007. He came out of Huntington High School in Huntington, Tennessee. All due respect to the people from Huntington, there's no way to measure a football player in Carroll County, Tennessee. There's just no way to know football talent. It's not Jackson, it's not Chattanooga, it's not Memphis, it's not Nashville, and it's not even Knoxville, for that matter.
Just like Patrick Willis, who Tennessee passed on. It was tough to judge him because of who he played, and then he went on the NFL Hall of Fame. But
yeah,
yes.
Exactly. It is really hard at the high school level because of these issues, because unlike what's happening with college football, where all the talent's about to get consolidated into the top with the SEC and the Big Ten taking over everything, it is still massively spread out with high school. And so you're right, you're going to have to draft a little more with raw talent. So Chris Donald was one of those guys he took a shot on, and it just didn't work out. It was, and again, the competition was a concern when he was was recruited. I mean, I think you and I may agree he may have been up to a 5-star because he was productive and Tennessee wanted him, and we know how politicking goes with rivals at the time. I will say this when it comes to potential. There's one thing I'll say, because you've talked about this a lot. There's a pretty good track record of player development with Josh Heupel, better than a lot of other coaches I've seen. And maybe he believes that he can go a little more with potential because he knows how to develop players and maximize what they can do. I mean, we saw this with Nick Saban. Maybe not even develop them, but just maximize what they can do. You talk about running backs that couldn't hit the hole. Trent Richardson was the worst of all time at not seeing the hole, and Nick Saban still found use for him. I mean, and he was the fact that whoever in Oakland decided to draft him should have been fired as a GM immediately, because it was so obvious he was not an NFL running back.
Well, and in college, it's easier to hit the hole when there are 5 holes.